Hello everyone, my name is Richard and I'm going to do a book talk on books on war and the effects on war. So I want to ask you real quick, why should we read books on war? Okay, because they're interesting? Yeah, that's a good reason. I think books on war are very interesting to read. But let's dig a little deeper. Why else should we read books on war? Okay, so that we can prevent wars in the future and learn about bad things that happen in war? Correct, I agree. That's a very good answer. And I'm going to ask you that at the end, the same question, and see if we can gain some insight. So the first book that I'm going to go over is called The Family Romanov, Murder, Rebellion, and the Fall of Imperial Russia by Candace Fleming. And this is a book about, it's not just about war, but it's about a family, a Russian family who was very powerful, had a lot of money, and had so much more money than the regular citizens of Russia. So already there's going to be conflict when you have all these poor peasants and poor people, and then they got to look at this family who has everything, all power, money, and everybody, and so many other people are workers and peasants and dirt poor. So they're already not going to like the family, and that involves Tsar Nicholas II and Empress Alexandra. But then you throw in a war, and that's World War I. World War I was a very bloody war for Russia. And that's going to really put stress on this family and their leadership. So I'm going to read an excerpt here. Okay, so back in the palace, Nicholas knew very little about his soldiers' plight. Daily reports reassured him that both morale and equipment are in splendid order. When he inspected troops in January 1915, the commanders prepared one company and collected all the best uniforms from the other regiments for it to wear, recalled one soldier, leaving the rest of the men in the trenches without boots, knapsacks, trousers, uniforms, hats, or anything else. It was obvious that Russia's war effort was on the verge of collapse, and everyone in the Tsar's government knew it. Everyone except Nicholas himself. So when things don't go good in war, who are you going to blame? You're going to blame the leaders. And that's why they got in trouble. All right, that's one of the reasons they got in trouble. So we're going to check the next book. Next book is called Diary of Anne Frank, Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank. And I want to ask you a question. How do you think war affects normal citizens? Okay, they become prisoners, yes. That's an example. They could also be persecuted. And Anne Frank was a Jewish family, was a member of a Jewish family. And she was persecuted along with her family by the Nazis. So they had to hide in this attic in Amsterdam to avoid the persecution and avoid being captured and sent to concentration camps. This book is a very good book about her life living in the annex. And she actually is a normal teenager, a normal girl living under extraordinary circumstances. So I want to read this excerpt real quick. Nothing but tumult and uproar yesterday. We are still very head up about it all. You might really ask, does a day go by without some excitement? We had the first warning siren while we were at breakfast, but we don't give a hoot about that. It only means that the planes are crossing the coast. After breakfast, I went and laid down for an hour as I had a bad headache. Then I went downstairs. It was about 2 o'clock. Margaret had finished her office work at 2:30. She had not packed her things together when the sirens began to wail. So upstairs I went again with her. It was high time, for we had not been upstairs 5 minutes when they began shooting hard, so much that we went and stood in the passage. And yes, the house rumbled and shook, and down came the bombs. So this family had to deal with that many times while they were in that secret hiding place. And they had to worry about getting captured and caught and found. I'm not going to tell you how the book ends, but I'm going to say it's a very, very interesting read. Okay, so the next book I want to read, or I want to go over, is about weapons of war. And as you know, war can produce many different kinds of weapons. Has anybody ever heard of the atom bomb? Okay, can you tell me something about it? It can kill millions of people? Yeah, that's correct. It's an extremely powerful weapon that was created during World War II. And do you know what? It is still a threat today to people in society. This book called Bomb by Steve Sheinkin explains everything about the history of the bomb and also about the science behind the bomb. So it's a very exciting book and includes, attacks on Nazis, and it includes spies, Russian spies, battles, war battles, all kind of things about the bomb. But it also, the best part of the book is really about Hiroshima. That part, to me, was the most important part, and the most exciting part, and sad part as well. So I want to read an excerpt about Hiroshima. That's when the U.S. dropped an atom bomb on this Japanese city during World War II. 43 seconds after dropping from the plane at an altitude of 1,800 feet above Hiroshima, the bomb's two pieces of uranium slammed together, setting off an explosive chain reaction. The blinding flash and raging fireball looked just like the ones at Trinity, only this time there was a city underneath. A 10-year-old boy named Shintaro Fugara was standing outside his school with his younger brother at the moment of the explosion. I saw a red dragonfly winging along and finally alighting on the wall right in front of me, he remembered. Just as my brother reached out to catch the dragonfly, there was a flash. I felt I'd suddenly been blown into a furnace. When I opened my eyes after being flung 8 yards, it was still dark, as if I was facing a wall painted black. Gosh, that is scary. So you'll see several things about this in this book, about the atom bomb. The next book I want to read about is by George Takei. It's called They Called Us Enemy. This is a graphic novel. And sometimes war can cause hatred and racism. And this is a perfect example in this book right here. This family, Japanese Americans, were taken from their home and sent to Arkansas because of their race and because they thought that they were the enemy. Isn't that terrible? That's just very disturbing, but true. So I want to read a quick excerpt about this. This is when they get to their house, their prison house. They open the door. They're looking. They open the door. He says, "Here we are." He opens the door. It's so hot. It's like a furnace. I'll never forget the heat that poured out of that cabin when Daddy opened the door. It steamed like a furnace. So this is what's so disturbing about this story, is that this could happen on American soil. That this hatred and racism, caused one thing about war, could happen on American soil. Very disturbing. But a very good book. And the last one I want to go over to is perhaps the most violent and disturbing book on war that I've read. It's called Boots on the Ground, America's War in Vietnam. And Vietnam was a very bloody war, probably one of the later wars that happened. They had over 58,000 Americans die and countless more injured. And of course, the South and North Vietnam, casualties over 1 million. But a lot of times people were wondering, why were we fighting this war? And the soldiers were feeling that too. In war, soldiers have to deal with the hardest part of the war, because they actually have to do the fighting and face the violence and all that stuff. So I want to read about a first-hand account of a soldier, because this book is all about first-hand accounts of soldiers that had to fight the war. Another grenade landed nearby, and shrapnel tore into him in a dozen places. Blood from his injuries quickly blossomed on his uniform. He noticed his right arm was sticking out at a weird angle. He tried to move it. No response. He shoved his left hand into his armpit and pulled it back out. He cupped his hand. His cupped hand was full of his warm, sticky blood, and more was quickly pumping out. Scruggs repeated the Lord's Prayer to himself, but it brought him no comfort. I'm going to be dead within 15 minutes in this little nothing battle in Vietnam, and that's not going to change the course of the war, he thought. So this book recounts several people of different races and different sexes that had to fight this war, all kind of people. And a lot of them felt like he did. Why was I fighting this war? And finally, I want to ask a question to conclude. I want you to tell me, why should we read books on war? From what you heard, why? Okay, because it can make us not want to fight wars if we know about the violence, racism, and destruction that can happen from war. Yeah, I agree with you. That's a great answer. I agree that learning about war and reading about war can help prevent war and its terrible effects in the future. All right, my name is Richard Schmidt. I enjoyed having this book talk with you all, and I hope that you all read these books, because they're great books. Okay, see y'all later.